What's up? Welcome to Four Downs, here with Zac Elder and Daniel Carp. I'm Danny Nolan. We're here to break down this weekend's action against the University of Pittsburgh. But before we get to that game, this past weekend's game against Georgia Tech, not exactly what the Blue Devils would have liked. Please tell me, what happened to Duke this past weekend?
Well, the spread option offense was potent for Georgia Tech. But what's even worse than that is that Duke gave up 4 passing touchdowns through the air to quarterback Vad Lee. When you're facing a spread option attack, you have to limit the passing game and the running game. The passing game normally doesn't produce that good of results, and in the end, Georgia Tech's offense just rolled the Duke defense.
And so now going into this weekend against the Panthers, it's a team that it's a first in the ACC, but most certainly has a lot of history to it. 17 matchups up to this point. Give us a little historical context in regards to this matchup.
Well, Danny, this is the first game that Duke is playing against with the ACC's 3 new members that they inducted last July. But what's really interesting is the amount of history that Duke and Pittsburgh have between them for 2 teams that have never played a conference game against each other before. Take it all the way back to October 5th, 1929. Duke and Pittsburgh actually played the very first game in the history of Wallace-Wade Stadium. Of course, that game took place 2 years before Wallace-Wade took over as Duke's head coach. It was actually called Duke Stadium at the time. But looking ahead, 1976 was the last time these 2 teams met. Pittsburgh had a guy on their sidelines, Tony Dorsett, they called him. I think he won the Heisman Trophy that year.
So.
And Pittsburgh went on to win a national championship. So it was a pretty good year for them. I don't think Duke's necessarily going to have to face that level of talent this weekend against the Panthers.
So now give me some matchups to look for here. You've given me good matchups so far on Four Downs. What is Duke going to have to do against Pitt this weekend?
I think primarily Duke is going to have to limit the play of Pittsburgh's wide receivers. For a team that just came in the ACC, the Panthers have one of the top wide receiving duos in the conference, looking at Devin Street and Tyler Boyd. Street, of course, is big, stands at 6'4", and is going to be a really big matchup problem potentially for Duke. Obviously, all ACC corner Ross Cockrell is going to be the man assigned to guarding Street, but the X factor in Saturday's matchup could be Tyler Boyd. True freshman who burst onto the scene last week in his first collegiate contest, exploded for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's 6'2", blazing speed. He could be a guy that really hurts Duke depending on how Garrett Patterson can keep up with him.
The wide receiver cornerback matchup is definitely going to be big. I think the X factor is actually going to be the guys up front, that Pittsburgh offensive line against the experienced Duke defensive line. Pittsburgh's 2 starting guards weigh 325 and 340 pounds respectively. Those are some big boys. And that Pitt running game has been putting up 6.2 yards a carry through its first 2 games. Against Florida State was one of those teams they played, and that's a good run defense. So I think that big offensive line in Pitt is going to be the real factor in the game.
So they've got size, they've got speed. Pittsburgh, Duke this Saturday. Wallace-Wade, who you got in the game?
You know, it's a shame that Duke kind of has to rebuild its offense right now around Brandon Kennett at this point in the season because they're playing some of their easier ACC opponents and they're also still in the midst of a non-conference schedule that they really need to run the table on if they want to go to a second straight bowl game for the first time in school history. I think that Duke is not able to put it together this week. They're going to be closer. They're going to be better than they were against Georgia Tech, but I think Pitt takes this game 24-20.
I agree with Dan. I think Kennett's going to get his footing under him better this week. Duke's going to execute better on third downs, and the offense is going to perform at a higher level, but I don't see the Blue Devils getting it done. I've got the Panthers 31-17.
Duke, Pittsburgh this weekend, 12:30 at Wallace-Wade Stadium. For Zac Elder, Daniel Carp, I'm Danny Nolan. We'll see you guys later.